When you hear about leadership, what comes to mind? This is such an important subject, yet it's not taught in schools. We keep saying things like, we are the leaders of tomorrow, we're the leaders of tomorrow, and nobody gets to teach us how to be leaders. When you become a leader, how do you go about being that leader? Hello, my name is Dami Oguntunde, and you're welcome to the Faith and Culture Podcast. Today, by God's grace, I'll be starting a brand new series on leadership, and it promises to be a very insightful and transformational series. So for the next several episodes, I'll be talking specifically about leadership and how you can transform your leadership potential, and I'll be hashing on a few very relevant and important elements in leadership. Now, starting off, I'd like to talk on what I've titled Building the Right Esteem. Building the Right Esteem. Now, leadership is such a very important and foundational concept that we all need to understand. Now, we see in and around us the effects of poor leadership. If you live in any third world country, you can see evidently how devastating poor leadership, the effect it can have on the citizenry and the people at large. It affects everything. Like Johnson Maxwell would say, he says that everything rises and falls on leadership. And so it is so critical that we understand what leadership really is all about. And interestingly, this is such an important subject, yet it's not taught in schools. It's just funny that a topic of this magnitude, of this impact, of this size, is not taught in school academically so that people can understand exactly how to lead. Because we keep saying things like, we are the leaders of tomorrow, we're the leaders of tomorrow, and nobody gets to teach us how to be leaders. But thank God for the Christian worldview, because if there's anything that we know about the Bible and Christianity, is that there is a lot about leadership in that book. I remember how, remember the story in Matthew 20, how some of the disciples of Jesus had gotten their mother to, I don't know how they got her to decide to do this, but for some reason, the mother of James and John, the sons of Zebedee, that is Mommy Zebedee, brought her children to Jesus, and she was lobbying for them to sit at the right-hand side and the left-hand side of Jesus in glory. And then Jesus said it's not given to him to decide who sits on the right or the left, as long as people do the right thing and sacrifice and do the work of leadership. It shouldn't matter where they sit and all of that. And he used it as an opportunity to share with his disciples his ideology around leadership. He says that the way the princes of the Gentiles and the people of the world, the way they exercise dominion over the people that they lead, that is not how the Christian overview or the Christian ideology about leadership ought to be done. That is, Christ himself had a very unique perspective about leadership, and he made it very clear that it was very different from the way the typical agnostic worldview is on leadership. So what is this idea about leadership about? When you hear about leadership, what comes to mind? And when you become a leader, because you're a leader in your own stead, when you become a leader, how do you go about being that leader? Now, before we go into the core of what I have to share with you, it's important to recognize the fact that you may have already been produced by a set of biases that you've been exposed to over the years as a person that lived, for example, in Nigeria, where, for example, once somebody is older than you, there's the assumption that the person knows more than you, or where you see people that have opulence, influence, positions, money, riches, authority, you just tend to, assume that they have what it takes to be leaders. And this is perhaps one of the biggest reasons why we are still in the situation we found ourselves, as a country. My point is, these biases impact and influence negatively on how you yourself would also be a leader when you have the opportunity to be a leader. I'll give you an example. Back in secondary school, I went to a boarding house, and what usually happened back on campus or back in secondary school was the fact that, when the junior boys come, they come in very innocent, very naive, very harmless people and all of that. But the seniors, their eyes have seen shaggy, you understand? And then those seniors beat the JSS1 boys, the JSS2 boys, the JSS3 boys, the SS1 and SS2 boys. They take their provisions, they bully them, they take from them, they spank them. When those ones go hard to fetch water, they collect their buckets of water. When Owu, they used to call it back then Owu breeze, when Owu breeze has blown over the entire college campus, everybody doesn't have much. So the people that have been preserving and managing their little food stuff and their provisions, they are the ones that the seniors will come and bully and take their milk and their Milo and Bonvita and stuff like that. By the time these junior boys now become senior boys as well, they will perpetuate the exact levels of atrocities on the next generation of younger people in the college. Why does this happen? Because they've been conditioned by that experience that they lived through, that this is what leadership is about, that this is what it means to be in a position of authority. You bully people, you dominate over them, you exercise authority, totalitarianism, you make them do what you want. You are the most important person. What they think doesn't matter. What they feel doesn't matter. Whatever they are going through is not your business. You need food. They have food. Even if they plan to use that food for the next 3 months of being on campus, it doesn't matter to you. You want to eat now and you take everything and it doesn't matter to you. That is the kind of mindset that we grew up in. And it's not unusual by the time you then find those same students who swore that they would never be like this terrible senior that beat them up. They go to secondary school, they get to SS3, SS2, and they do the exact same thing. Sometimes they even do worse to those who are coming behind them because they have been conditioned to interpret leadership through a very faulty lens. And until we understand what leadership is about, honestly, some of the things that we see in our world today, in our country, in our nation, in the economy, those things will not change. It's very easy to point accusing fingers at the president and the cabinet and the senate and all of those. And of course, they have a very huge slice of responsibility to take. Like we said, everything rises and falls on leadership. But leadership that is not communal, leadership that has not become pervasive, will not be an effective leadership. That is, leadership must be something that everybody at the grassroots takes responsibility for. This is why we must understand God's perspective on leadership. And I've come to realize that the underlying assumptions about the quality of people, about what makes people important, that underlying understanding, that underlying assumption about what really makes human beings valuable, that is at the crucible, is at the very crux of what leadership is about, which is where the idea of esteem comes in. And I will explain how it ties to leadership. I've observed that when someone gets into a leadership position and they use that authority to bully people, to take advantage, to silence people, to marginalize and objectify people and all that, it is usually because they have a faulty idea of their own relative importance. That is, they derive their sense of esteem, they derive their sense of worth from something, and that thing is not a reliable source of estimation. So, if, for example, I derive my source of authority, my source of identity, my source of meaning from the money that I have, that automatically conditions me to devalue people that don't have money. That automatically conditions me to devalue people that don't have as much as I do. And also, that also makes me inferior to people that have more money than me. Because my worldview, the way I process things and people, is through the lens of materialism. So when someone has money, I think that they have something that I don't have. When someone does not have money, I think that they don't have something that I have. So when I'm around a place where people have a lot of money, I'll feel small. And when I go to a place where I have the most money, I'll feel big. So therefore, anyone who is capable of being arrogant is also capable of feeling very inferior, of having inferiority complex, because they are just two ends of the same stick. I read this book, a very powerful book, The Millionaire Next Door, and there was this story of this particular guy who seemed to have a lot of money. But you see, relative to other people, of course, he didn't have so much. But the little that he had was a lot more than what the general public had. So this particular guy who was writing this book wanted to create some form of, an interview session with each of these millionaires and to just get a sense of their habits and how they spent money and how they behaved and their behavioral patterns and all of that. So he called about 10 millionaires, but one of them could not make it. So in a last bit to still continue with the interview, he called a 10th guy who was not part of his original list, but because he didn't have the time to get another person who was of the same profile, he called this guy who was not particularly on the profile list, but he was a close substitute. So he just got him into the panel. And then by the time the guy came, number one, he came late. And by the time he came, he was the most outlandishly dressed. Now, by the time he showed up, by just showing up and seeing how he dressed and how he was clearly looking better than the rest of the people in the room, and he didn't realize that every other person also was a millionaire. He didn't know that. So he came into the room feeling cocky, arrogant, and by the time they asked him questions around, tell us about yourself, the way he threw words around, the way he talked about the money he had, the way he talked about everything, he had assumed that he was the richest guy in the room. By the time he was done speaking and the rest of the people started introducing themselves, these guys, the other people in the room, started talking with so much humility, but the money they had, the money these guys had in their account, that you couldn't even tell by looking at them and what they were wearing and how, unassuming they were. This guy felt so embarrassed. That first guy felt so embarrassed. He didn't say a word for the entire rest of the interview session. Now, the very reason why he was arrogant was the same reason why he felt inferior to them. Because he derived his estimation, he derived his meaning, he derived his sense of fulfillment and worth from money, materialism. If you derive your sense of worth from money, people that don't have it will look less than human beings to you. Those that have more than you will feel like gods to you. Either ways, you would have a very faulty way of relating with other people through the lens of materialism. And don't we see a lot of this going on in our society today? The fact that you come into a place and you size people up. People show up and you size them up on the strength of what they have, what they don't have, how they speak, how they show up, the clothes on their back, the cars they rode in, the phones, that they're using, the wristwatch, everything. You are sizing them up. Oh, is this kind of person that I want to respect? Oh, this person has more money. Let me respect him. Oh, this one is very rags. I mean, who cares? But that is what exactly the Bible teaches us against. It says when people come to our church and they're not looking great because they're not wearing purple clothes and very nice outfits, don't discriminate against them. Don't reduce them to nothing simply because they don't have money. Of course, we are all aware of the very, very unfortunate statement that a clergyman made recently about how Jesus hates the poor. These are very unwarranted comments. It is totally unnecessary to make such statements because nothing in scripture gives or suggests such a position by the word of God. Now, that's by the way. But what I'm trying to make here, the kind of point I'm trying to make here is this, that the moment you begin to make or derive your estimation from the things that you have already come up with a faulty way of estimating yourself and other people as well. Some people, it may not be money. For some, it may be intellectuality. That is, when people are not really smart, you don't rate them as much. In fact, we come up with a name called sapiosexual. That means you are attracted to people to the degree of their intellectual sophistication. So if people are very smart, you like them. You are just falling in love with them. Their beauty may not matter. Their monies may not matter. But if they are really smart intellectually, boy, they have your love and affection. That is also a faulty way of looking at people. Some people, it is political power and influence and popularity. That is, if you're popular, boy, you are loved. If you're famous, they want to be with you. But the moment you lose all of that as well, they also try to distance themselves from you. It doesn't matter how you look at it. Any other worldview, any other lens through which you see yourself, apart from the lens that the scriptures suggest, will either make you arrogant or feel inferior to people. And that is not a way to feel by any stretch of the imagination. That is, if you're an arrogant person, you would have a terrible relationship with other people. And if you also feel inferior every time you come into a place where you feel like people are better than you, you would also have a very terrible relationship with people. So what is the balanced way to look at yourself? Because if you don't get this esteem right, your leadership will be faulty. If you don't understand how to see yourself, the lens through which you must perceive yourself, the way you will treat people will be wrong, the way you treat yourself will be wrong, the way you will treat even the people that could help you will be wrong, because you have a faulty way of perceiving people's value. When I was in secondary school, Federal Government College Odogbolu, I had this very terrible condition on my legs, right, where spots would just pop up, literally like popcorn. They would just pop out of my legs. I didn't have to have any injury. I didn't have to do anything. They would just show up. That is, I can count 8 on my leg one day, and by the next day I have 18. Like, ridiculous stuff. So I would have to put all kinds of drugs and medication on my legs. So I'll put penicillin or stuff like that in capsules, and I'll put it on the injury, and then I would have to wear my white socks on it. So you can imagine how graphic it is. Sorry, I'm trying to paint a very graphic image in your mind right now. And then I'll put up my socks on it, and then I'll walk to class every single day. Now, by afternoon, The sun has hit my leg. It's very hot. I'm a bit sweaty. By the time I'm back to the hostel and I need to remove my socks, it's almost like every time I have to remove my socks off all of those, injuries, they call them septic wounds at the time, all of those septic wounds, it was a lot of pain that I was going through on both legs. And we were wearing shorts. That means everybody in the hostel, everybody wherever I was going, saw my legs. And they came up with a conclusion about who I was and how some people may assume that it was because I was dirty or whatever it is. I didn't know what people were thinking about me, but what I thought of myself was very terrible. I felt so terrible. I felt like I was such an irritant. I felt like nobody wanted to have anything to do with me. I felt like there was nobody that wanted to be my friend. Because why would you want to be walking along with this guy that always has wounds popping out of his leg? Let him not even infect you. Look at how he looks. Because by the end of the day, my socks are spotted across the landscape of my leg like a polka dot design. It was terrible. And several times I told God, I said, I don't want this anymore. I want to die. Just make me sleep and never wake up again. Several times I made that prayer. Thank God he didn't answer that prayer. Why did I feel that way? Because I felt less of myself. I felt like, what's the point? Everybody's walking this way. I would choose the convenient opposite direction because I didn't want to be seen. I didn't want anybody to look at me funny. Then one day, they called it Babambari, right? That day I went to the dining hall. I was taking my food. And then this girl walks up to me, looks at my legs, makes a disgusted look, and wanted to go and call all our other friends to look at my leg and make mockery of me. I almost died in that moment. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me. I didn't go back to the dining hall that day. And I just almost died. I was like, God, what kind of embarrassment is this? And of course, I imagined that was from there that I began to think of all kinds of ways God could take my life. I'm grateful he didn't. And how did I come out of that situation? Because eventually, in that same college, I became the deputy head boy, I became the assistant pastor. I was one of the, best students on campus. I keep using campus, but in secondary school at the time. And I eventually turned out pretty well. But where did the transformation start from? It started from me recognizing the fact that my value did not come from anybody's opinion of me. My value did not come from what I had. It didn't come from my health condition. It didn't come from what anybody thought of me. It didn't come from the money that I have or didn't have. It didn't come from anything. It came from what God thought of me. Because guess what? Every esteem is derived. Esteem comes from the root word estimate, estimation. You can't estimate without comparison. You can't estimate without checking for the value of other things. You see, you come up with an estimate by checking the value of comparables. Then you estimate, oh, well, yeah, it's worth it because you know what the comparables go for in the market. So every estimation or every esteem is an estimation, and no estimation is by itself. Every estimation is derived. That means you can't have an esteem except you leverage what something said about you. That means you can't have and this is why parenting is such an important task, because a child's esteem growing up is heavily dependent and reliant on how the parents perceive the child and what the parents call the child. And that is the kind of esteem that child will grow with. He will grow feeling esteemed to the degree that his parents esteemed him or her. And hopefully the child will grow to a point where he begins to esteem himself based on what God calls him or her as well. When I realized that what God called me was that he loved me, when he told me that I'm his image and I'm after his likeness, when he told me that I'm the apple of his eyes, that he has engraved me on the palm of his hands, when he told me these things, it changed my paradigm completely. I stopped living for the approval of men. I stopped living feeling like I was inferior to people. And so because I now took my esteem from an objective evaluation of my real worth, who else can better define what a thing is worth than the creator of that thing itself? And so the creator of the universe and the creator of my soul and my spirit tells me that I am loved and I'm the apple of his eyes. This is who I am. I am the image of God. Now, I have a very objective reference point for my value and my estimation and my worth. And guess what? I'm not the only one he values that way. So, the same way I have now seen myself as the apple of God's eye, as the image of God, guess what? I'm not any special. Every single person looking at me right now, that's the exact way God sees you. He doesn't see you as inferior to anybody, because every single human being on the face of the earth is the apple of God's eye, is the image of God. It doesn't matter what their religious affiliations may be. It doesn't matter what world they were born into. It doesn't matter what their economic realities may look like. They are the image of God. And that is the absolute minimum that any human being is worth. And guess what? It's also the absolute maximum that everybody is worth. We are all the image of the living God. That means, on the strength of that estimation, I have no reason to feel superior to anyone, because there's nothing that I have that you don't have. In the same vein, I have absolutely no reason to feel inferior to anyone, because there's nothing that you have that I don't have. And this boosts your confidence, and you're able to look at any challenge in the face. You're able to walk into a room with your head held high, and you're able to handle situations and circumstances with a level of composure, calmness, and self-dignity, because you are not measuring yourself against the metrics that are very, very transient, like money, like popularity, like fame, like position, like all those things don't last. Yes, you are the president at this point. It may not last 4 years. It may not last more than 8 years. Oh yes, you are the richest man in the world. Jeff Bezos just lost his place to some other person. My point is, these things are transient. The more you evaluate yourself against these very transient metrics, the less you have a strong esteem that can weather the kinds of storms that this life that we are living in will throw at each and every one of us. We navigate the rapids of leadership through this strong sense of understanding of who we are in Christ, in God, and how we perceive other people. Because what makes people worth leading? What makes them worth serving? If not the fact that they are also the image of God. And if you are the leader over these people, there is a way you will perceive them, there is a way you will relate with them, different from how the world will relate with people that they serve. We do not lead our serfs. We do not lead our subjects. We, who are the leaders, actually are supposed to be the ministers. This is what Jesus teaches in Matthew chapter 20. And this is the paradigm that changed my perspective about leadership, about life as a secondary school boy who has now grown to be a leader across multiple fronts in my life till today. I hope you found this useful and refreshing. We have 9 more installments to go. So please stay tuned and watch out for the next episode. God bless your heart. Build the right esteem the right way. God bless you.